Some betrayals don't arrive with thunder. They arrive like a draft under a door you thought was sealed, a whisper that keeps you awake, until the whisper becomes the truth you can't unknow. I'm 33, a mother, a soldier who learned to march long after the orders stopped, and the day my life split cleanly in two, before and after, was a Tuesday. I came home early with takeout and a stupid happy plan to surprise my husband. The music reached me first, a low pulse, not his playlist, something chosen to make the room breathe. Our bedroom door was open a sliver enough for the light to slip out and slice me into two women, the one I had been and the one I was about to become. Through that thin, bright cut, I saw my best friend Lana, the woman who stood next to me at my promotion, the godmother who held my daughter while I cried from joy, dancing naked for Ethan on our bed. I did not scream. Instead, something hard and cold grew in me, a precise diamond of clarity. I took 3 photos, each one deliberate, like marking coordinates on a map I would later navigate. Then I set the takeout on the counter, sat in my car, and shook until shaking became breath again. Here is the thing about being a woman trained to assess a field: you learn to see patterns you don't want to see. Lana's sudden gym membership at Ethan's club, their jokes that landed with a secret second meaning, the pauses in his answers when I asked about his day, the way her lip curled when she said my name, as if sounding it out for the first time. I had excused each shard as harmless. She's lonely, he's stressed. I'm overthinking, until the shards arranged themselves into a mirror that forced me to look. I drove to the cafe where the barista knows the color of my tired, and I opened a cloud account I had avoided because I still believed in privacy as a kind of love. It did not love me back. There were months of messages, threads that tied them together in knots they thought I'd never untangle. There were hotel charges renamed as readiness drills, selfies cropped at the edges to keep my reflection out, and sentences about me I will not repeat because I have learned the difference between telling a story and letting it devour you. I could have confronted them immediately and detonated my life in the doorway. Instead, another part of me, older, steadier, the part that knows a plan keeps you from drowning in your own rage, began arranging chairs for a conversation no one would forget. Ethan liked dinner parties, curated wines, plates that matched toasts that sounded like commercials for the people making them. Lana liked being center stage. Her parents were in town for a conference, people she admired and sometimes feared. I made calls in a voice so calm it frightened me. Saturday, I told him, small, intimate. I told Lana's mother, Eleanor, a gracious woman, with a voice that turned sweet and iron in the same breath that I wanted to celebrate recent discoveries. She laughed. She said it sounded mysterious. I said it will be. The next days were a clean, ruthless choreography. I visited my attorney and turned the diamond inside my chest into paperwork, custody arrangements, financial forensics, a list of questions to answer with documents instead of tears. I learned Ethan had carved our future into smaller and smaller pieces, moving money for a year, renaming withdrawals until they could hide among other necessities. $200,000 gone as quietly as our trust. I wanted to be sick. I wanted to run. Instead, I bought flowers, candles, and 3 small cameras. Planning is a kind of prayer when you no longer believe in miracles. Friday night, I ironed the tablecloth we received as a wedding gift. I imagined the version of me who had unwrapped it, bright with hope, a little naive, certain that love could survive on vows alone, and I pressed the iron over a crease until the steam rose and memory softened into something I could fold away. Saturday morning, I ran before dawn until my lungs reminded me I was still here. I showered slowly. I put on the pearl necklace Ethan had clasped at my nape on our 10th anniversary. What once felt like a promise now felt like armor. I slid the cameras into the corners of the rooms like quiet witnesses, not because I needed more proof to believe myself, but because I knew what denial could do to a story when it thinks it's in charge. At 6:30, the doorbell sang its bright, lying song. Lana stood there in green silk, flawless as a magazine page. She said my name as if it were a password only she held. I led her to the sofa that faced the television and sat where I could see her eyes forget how to lie. When the screen lit up, she made that sound people make when the world pulls the rug from beneath their perfect shoes. "Turn it off," she breathed, and her voice so often, the voice that guided me through fear, sounded suddenly like a stranger had borrowed it. I told her I'd invited her parents. I told her I had thought about history and owed balances about what it meant to love someone enough to be honest in public. She went pale. Somewhere outside, a car door closed. Footsteps crossed our threshold. Ethan called hello with the confidence of a man certain the room will bend to his version. It didn't. I stood. I introduced the truth as if it were a guest of honor. I handed Eleanor and Richard envelopes and said words that had been waiting in my throat for months. "For 8 months they've been doing this," I said, and my voice did not shake. "In my house, with my daughter asleep down the hall." Faces fell like glass in slow motion. Someone said my name. Someone said, "This is private." The air said otherwise. And in that clean, terrible light, the night began to remake us all. The room froze in that impossible silence where even the air seems to hold its breath. Eleanor's hand, still gloved from the evening, trembled as she opened the envelope. Richard's face tightened with the practiced composure of a man who had lived long enough to know that appearances shatter faster than glass. Lana sat rigid, her silk dress suddenly looking like a costume. Ethan, my husband, though even the word felt like a costume itself, stood in the doorway, still holding a bottle of wine he'd thought would impress her parents. It dangled loosely, absurd in its fragility, as if a cork and label could save him. I spoke evenly, though inside me something burned hot and relentless. "I wanted you to hear it here," I said to Lana's parents, not in whispers, not from tabloids, not after lies piled higher. "Your daughter has been sleeping with my husband, and they thought it would remain a secret." Lana finally found her voice thin and brittle. "This isn't the way. This is exactly the way I cut her off. Because betrayal thrives in shadows. And I'm done giving it shade." The screen behind her flickered again. The footage I'd captured, her body twisting in the lamplight of my bedroom. Ethan leaning forward with that hungry look I once thought was mine, played without mercy. Eleanor gasped, hand to her mouth, while Richard's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might break. Ethan dropped the wine. It shattered red, spilling across the floor like a wound neither of them could bandage. For a moment, I wasn't sure what hurt them more, the images, the evidence, or the fact that I had been the one to unveil it all. Because power isn't just about what you know, it's about who controls when the truth enters the room. Tonight, it was me. Ethan finally spoke, his voice desperate, pleading. "We can explain." I laughed, though it sounded more like a sob that had been sharpened. "Explain. What's left to explain when I've been raising our daughter while you two rehearsed deceit in my house, while you moved money in secret, while she whispered my name like it was already a tombstone?" He reached for me, but I stepped back. I wanted him to feel the gap, the chasm he'd created with every lie. Lana tried to speak, her eyes darting toward her parents, but Eleanor silenced her with one raised hand. And in that gesture, I saw something remarkable: shame reflected back at its source, a daughter forced to sit in the mess she had chosen. "Do you realize," Eleanor said softly, her voice breaking but still clear, "what you've done not only to her, but to yourself?" Lana's eyes filled, but no tears fell. She was too practiced at pretending. My daughter stirred in the other room, a faint cry, cutting through the tension like a reminder of what truly mattered. I excused myself long enough to pick her up, rocking her gently against my shoulder. And as I returned to the living room holding that fragile life, the contrast was searing: innocence swaddled in my arms, betrayal unraveling in front of me. I looked at Ethan, then really looked. The man I had loved since my 20s, the one I believed would build a life with me, now looked small, diminished. A boy caught playing dress-up in adulthood. And I realized something I hadn't let myself admit until now. I no longer loved him. The ache in my chest wasn't love. It was grief. Grief for the years I had wasted believing in a version of him that never truly existed. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice steady again. "Tomorrow the papers are filed. Custody, divorce, assets. The lawyers already have the evidence. Tonight was just the preview." Ethan's face drained of color. Lana's parents exchanged a glance heavy with disappointment and shame. I shifted my daughter against my chest and felt her small breath on my neck grounding me. I don't need revenge, I added softer now, because you've already destroyed yourselves. I just needed you to watch it burn. I left them there broken in their separate silences and carried my baby upstairs. As I laid her gently back into her crib, I realized something vital. Sometimes justice isn't about courtrooms or vengeance. Sometimes it's about reclaiming the voice that betrayal tried to steal. And tonight I had shouted without raising my voice. But the story wasn't over. Because betrayal leaves ruins, and ruins always have secrets buried beneath them. I didn't yet know how deep Ethan's lies went. I didn't yet know how much money, how many promises, how many years had been swallowed by his greed. But I would find out. And when I did, I would make sure he never held power over me or our daughter again. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the floorboards like nothing had changed yet. Everything had. Ethan had left sometime in the night, his cologne still lingering faintly in the hall like a ghost that refused to leave. I brewed coffee with shaking hands, staring at the steam as if it might spell out answers. My daughter babbled softly in her crib, a fragile reminder that life still insisted on moving forward, even when betrayal tried to anchor me in the past. I thought I would feel triumphant after exposing them, but what I felt instead was raw, aching emptiness. Revenge is rarely the bomb we imagine it's fire, and when the blaze dies down, you're left with ashes in your throat. Still, there was clarity in those ashes, a quiet conviction that I hadn't had in years. For the first time, I wasn't the one hiding, making excuses, or waiting for explanations that never came. I had pulled the curtain back, and no one could shove it closed again. The phone rang mid-morning. It was Daniel, my lawyer, his voice steady and precise. "We'll need to move quickly," he said. "Your husband has been funneling money out for months. I have reason to believe some of it went into accounts overseas." My stomach twisted. I remembered the receipts, the sudden business trips that didn't make sense, the way Ethan's smile grew sharper whenever I asked about finances. How much, I asked, bracing myself. 200,000 at least, maybe more. But don't panic, we'll track it. You'll be protected. Protected. The word lodged in my chest. I had spent years being anything but. Protected is what I thought marriage would mean, what best friendship would mean. Instead, both had become predators in disguise. That afternoon, I took my daughter for a walk. The autumn air was sharp, leaves crumbling under the wheels of her stroller. Every passerby seemed to glance at me a second too long, as if sensing something fractured behind my eyes. I wondered how many women around me carried similar stories invisible until the truth forced them into the open. Back home, I began sorting through papers. Bills, contracts, receipts, fragments of a life I no longer recognized. And then I found it, a deed transfer, quiet and almost buried, showing that Ethan had sold a small property we'd invested in years ago. My name had been erased from the transaction. I stared at the ink until it blurred. The theft wasn't just emotional, it was material, calculated. He hadn't just taken my trust, he had taken my future. That night Lana called. Her voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual confidence. "Why did you do it?" she asked, as if she were the victim. "Because you left me no choice," I answered. "You ruined me," she whispered. "No," I said, calmer than I felt. "You ruined yourself the day you decided my husband's arms were worth more than my friendship. I just made sure you couldn't hide it anymore." There was silence on the other end, then a faint sob before she hung up. I didn't feel joy in her tears, only a strange, distant pity. She had thrown away everything for him, only to realize he was never hers to keep. Betrayal devours everyone it touches. Days turned into a blur of meetings with lawyers, late-night feedings, and quiet strength I didn't know I had. The story spread, whispers turned into rumors, and soon half the city seemed to know. Some women I barely knew messaged me, sharing their own stories of infidelity, of friendships turned poisonous. I realized then that my story wasn't just mine. It was a mirror reflecting a pain that too many others carried in silence. One evening, as I folded tiny pajamas fresh from the dryer, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. My hair was pulled back, my face tired, but my eyes looked alive in a way they hadn't for years. Betrayal had tried to break me, but instead it had revealed me. Still, I knew the fight wasn't over. Ethan hadn't disappeared. He was out there scrambling, scheming, desperate to protect the fragments of the empire he thought he had built. And part of me feared what he might do when the walls closed in. But another part of me, the part that had already walked through fire, welcomed it. Because I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of her, not of the lies. I had already turned the lights on. And once the truth is lit, it cannot be dimmed. The weeks that followed felt like a strange limbo. Half destruction, half rebirth. Lawyers drafted papers, investigators uncovered more layers of deceit, and every day I discovered another way Ethan had betrayed me. Offshore accounts, hidden credit cards, even a loan against our home I had never signed. It was like peeling back wallpaper only to find rot underneath, each layer uglier than the last. And yet, while his empire crumbled, my daughter's laughter began to fill the apartment like sunlight. I would sit on the floor with her, watching her clutch toys with her tiny fists, and I'd feel strength surge through me. She was my anchor, proof that love could still exist untouched by corruption. One night, Daniel, my lawyer, stopped by with a folder. He looked tired but satisfied. "We've traced the funds," he told me. "He can't run from this. The court will see everything." I flipped through the documents, each line a nail in Ethan's coffin. Fraud, embezzlement, deceit written in numbers and signatures. I felt no triumph, only grim acceptance. This was the reality I had to navigate now. But what I hadn't expected was the message that arrived later that week. An anonymous email. The subject line, "She's not as loyal as you think." Inside were photographs, grainy but clear enough. Lana, my former best friend, meeting another man at a hotel. Smiles, two intimate hands brushing like they had rehearsed the choreography. Betrayal within betrayal. She hadn't just taken Ethan from me, she had been playing him too. At first I didn't know what to feel. Anger, satisfaction, pity. In the end I felt strangely detached. Their perfect little affair was nothing but two snakes coiling tighter until they strangled each other. They had thought they were so clever, so invincible. Now their lies were eating them alive from the inside. The city watched it all unfold. News outlets ran stories about their scandals, business associates cut ties, and even their friends began to vanish. People who once raised glasses in their honor now whispered their names like warnings. They became pariahs, not because of me alone, but because the truth has a way of spreading like wildfire once someone dares to strike the match. Through it all, I found myself changing. The timid woman who once waited by the window for Ethan to come home was gone. In her place stood someone sharper, steadier. I walked taller when I pushed the stroller down the street. I met strangers' eyes without shame. And when I saw my reflection, I no longer saw a victim, I saw a survivor. Still, there were nights when the weight of it all pressed down on me, nights when I wondered how I could ever trust again. But each time my daughter stirred in her crib, reaching blindly for comfort, and I knew trust didn't need to be given to anyone else just yet. It was enough to trust myself. The final blow came on a Saturday afternoon. My phone rang, Ethan's name flashing on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. His voice was ragged, desperate. "Please," he begged. "You've made your point. Don't let them take everything. I can fix this. I can change." I closed my eyes. Once those words would have broken me open. Once I would have believed. But not anymore. "You already took everything," I said quietly. "I'm just giving it back." He started to cry, the sound hollow and pathetic. "Don't hang up," he whispered. But I did. And as the line went dead, I felt lighter than I had in years. The chains he had wrapped around me had fallen away link by link until there was nothing left. That night I stood by the window holding my daughter in my arms. The city stretched out beneath us, glittering and alive. I whispered to her, "We're not broken. We're beginning." And for the first time I truly believed it. 4 weeks later, in a hospital room bathed in gentle morning light, I held my daughter for the very first time. Her tiny chest rose and fell against me, her fingers curling around mine with a strength that seemed impossible for something so small. Tears streamed down my face, not from exhaustion or fear, but from the realization that after months of betrayal and humiliation, this moment was untouched, pure. She was mine, ours. A life born not from their lies but from my resilience. When Daniel arrived later that day, he hovered at the doorway as though unsure if he belonged. He'd been my lawyer, my ally, but in that moment he looked more like a friend rediscovering what hope felt like. He stepped closer, his voice softer than I'd ever heard. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She's everything," I answered, my fingertip brushing her cheek. Daniel sat beside me, his presence quiet but grounding. After a long pause, he said, "You don't have to do this alone." His eyes betrayed what his voice tried to hide: hesitation, hope, maybe even something more. I didn't answer right away. I looked down at my daughter, her fragile body wrapped in a blanket, her tiny breath steady. For so long, I had carried everything by myself. But now, for the first time, I wondered if maybe I didn't have to. The days after her birth blurred into sleepless nights and tender mornings. Every cry, every tiny smile stitched me back together piece by piece. Betrayal had torn me apart, but motherhood rebuilt me stronger. The headlines about Ethan and Lana continued, each one a reminder of the empire they had lost: lawsuits, frozen accounts, public disgrace. But I no longer felt the need to read every detail. Their downfall was no longer my concern. My concern was the baby in my arms, the life that tethered me to something bigger than revenge. She was the proof that I could endure heartbreak and still create love. She was the reason I no longer looked back with bitterness, but forward with quiet determination. One evening, while folding her tiny clothes, I thought about the arc of it all: the best friend who betrayed me, the husband who abandoned me, the family I thought I'd lost. And I realized something vital: betrayal may shatter the illusion of love, but it also clears the ground for something more honest to grow. I wasn't broken anymore. I was awake. So if you're listening, if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, most hear me when I say this: your story does not end in the ruins. It begins there. The fire that tries to consume you can also light your way forward. I know because I walked through it, and I came out holding life in my arms. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. If my story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. And leave a comment, because your voice matters and your story deserves to be heard too.